Today we're diving into something, well, incredibly personal, yet lived out completely on a global stage. We're taking a close look, really looking at the words on the page, at selected excerpts from Spare, the memoir by Prince Harry.
That's right. And what we have here are these specific texts offering a unique window into a life we've all seen headlines about, sure, but rarely from this particular first-person viewpoint. It's really about exploring the experiences, the emotions, the actual moments described directly by, the person who lived them. Get ready to go beyond the usual headlines and dig into this specific account detailed right here in the words.
Okay, let's jump in. Starting sort of at the beginning, as the narrative does those early years, that profound sense of loss and how those initial shadows lingered, according to these excerpts.
Right. The text opens with some really striking descriptions of childhood, particularly focusing on Balmoral. And what's immediately fascinating is this contrasting perception presented. Harry describes it as his paradise, almost a place of, enchantment, vibrant with life. He even uses this really vivid analogy, comparing the feeling to the chambers of a heart filling with blood when floodwaters rush in.
And yet, we quickly learn from the pages that this wasn't everyone's experience of the same place, was it? He recounts hearing stories about others who didn't find that paradise there. There's the reference to a mad with grief long ago queen who isolated herself there, and maybe even more strikingly, a former prime minister who apparently found the place surreal and utterly freaky. That juxtaposition right at the start, the single location, holding such wildly different energies depending on who you were and what you were going through, it's a powerful insight the text offers about perception and reality in that world.
It really highlights how context and personal experience shape our view of a place, doesn't it? Even a seemingly stable one, like a royal estate. And the memoir offers these incredibly specific, almost surreal details about childhood routines that illustrate the uniqueness of his upbringing. We read about dinners where footmen arrive carrying trays covered with silver domes, which sounds incredibly grand.
Right, very formal.
But underneath, just kiddie stuff, like fish fingers or cottage pies. And there's the detail of hearing his father padding past in his slippers, carrying his wireless, which the text clarifies was actually his portable CD player for listening to storybooks. These small, specific moments paint a picture that's both, relatable in its childhood simplicity and utterly alien in its setting.
Those details really ground the narrative in the everyday, however extraordinary that everyday actually was. And the passages dedicated to the period surrounding his mother's death are particularly poignant and detailed in these texts. The description of the funeral walk, for instance, it's presented with such visceral clarity the way he, his father, and brother fell into this synchronous alignment, walking in lockstep without a word, all with bowed heads. Right. The text really emphasizes that the nearness of those graves encountered during that walk immediately reminded him of Mummy's funeral, bringing that earlier loss crashing back into the present moment.
That connection between the historical duty and the raw, personal grief comes through so strongly. The text also vividly describes the difficult experience at the gates after they returned to Balmoral. There's a powerful moment where he describes instinctively reaching for his father's hand for comfort, and that simple human gesture triggering an explosion of clicks from the masked press photographers across the road. He felt, looking back, that he had inadvertently given them precisely what they were ravenous for: emotion, drama, pain. They just fired and fired and fired. It's a chilling account of that intersection of private grief and relentless public scrutiny.
Wow. It speaks volumes about the pressure cooker environment he describes from such a young age. And the internal struggle with grief, as recounted in these pages, is laid bare, isn't it? We see this internal parliament of his consciousness divided, one part clinging to denial, thinking, Mummy isn't dead, she's hiding, and finding immense comfort in that thought. But then the text shows the other side asserting itself. Mummy would never do this to us. This internal back and forth, the battle between desperate hope and dawning painful reality, is explicitly detailed.
Yeah, and the narrative captures other sensory details from that time being kept away from the television, yet hearing the mournful psalm playing, which he later learned was being broadcast as his father returned from Paris. And after the death, the feeling at Balmoral is described as being inside a crypt, a place heavy with stillness and sorrow yet. Everyone was determinedly keeping to normal routines and schedules. Quite well. The text emphasizes this strange dissonance, immense unspoken grief coexisting with rigid adherence to daily life. It's quite something.
The memoir also places his personal loss within the historical context of the monarchy. He includes a reference to the royal burial ground near Frogmore, noting it as the final resting place for historical figures like Queen Victoria and, perhaps surprisingly, the notorious Wallis Simpson and her husband Edward. It subtly links his own grief to a much longer lineage of lives and deaths within the family structure.
Yes, drawing that line back through history, it adds another layer. And on a very different, more tender note, the text offers this beautiful description of his mother as light, pure, and radiant light. He even compares her presence, her essence, to the star Arundel, recently glimpsed by astronomers and named using the Old English word for morning star. It's a striking, almost mythical comparison that speaks to the enduring, almost ethereal way he perceived her.
Transitioning from that deeply personal foundation, the excerpts then guide us into how he navigated the complex world he was born into, the rules, the relationships, and how his identity began to form within that unique system. School seems to have been a key battleground for this based on the text.
Absolutely. The text touches on his school experiences, where those earlier Balmoral stories about the mad with grief queen and the prime minister's view of it being surreal somehow resurfaced. It highlights how the past and the institution's history constantly felt present. And throughout his schooling, he felt this constant, almost oppressive reminder that he was royal evidenced by an omnipotent bodyguard, armed, and uniformed police scattered across the grounds. Even in the relatively contained world of school, the outside world and his status within it was inescapable.
Right, and we also get a glimpse into his father's own struggles at school through his account, don't we? Pei apparently felt he had been persecuted at Gordonstown, a place his grandparents sent him to toughen him up. This detail from the text suggests that difficult, perhaps isolating school experiences weren't unique to Harry within the family history.
No, it seems not. And Eton, specifically, is described as a particularly tense environment, especially concerning his relationship with Willie. The text states quite starkly that it was pure agony for Willie to attend the same school, and that Willie even went as far as pretending not to know him. Adding to the awkwardness, the school, thinking to be helpful, initially put them under the same roof. This detail from the memoir paints a picture of early tension and distance between the brothers, a theme that really resonates throughout the excerpts.
Yeah, that definitely comes through. There's also a powerful moment described where he grapples with the pressure to mourn historical figures like his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather immediately after losing his own mother. He felt that being expected to publicly mourn the man around the clock felt like a daily kick in the balls for a boy still reeling from the death of his mom. This specific detail from the text underscores the profound conflict between his personal grief and the formal public demands of his role.
That constant clash between the personal and the institutional is a thread running right through the narrative, isn't it? The text also directly addresses public perception and the controversies he faced. The Nazi uniform incident, a major public firestorm, is described through the lens of his own reflection in the memoir as a failure of thinking, failure of character, failure of education.
And the fallout, as presented in the text, was severe, including public calls for him to be barred from the army. The excerpts also touch upon drug use, specifically cocaine use around the time of a tabloid story that surfaced. He recounts the editor seeking evidence, his decision to give a cock and bull story to a courtier, and describes feeling a strange sense of pride in that moment for channeling Granny's heroic stoicism, maintaining composure and control despite the crisis and the lie. It's a complex moment of self-description offered in the text.
Yes, that detail about feeling pride and stoicism, even while giving a misleading account, is revealing about the pressures he felt to maintain a certain appearance under duress. This all ties into the pervasive sense the text conveys of being perpetually cast in what he calls the rolling royal melodrama. He felt there were these ingrained assumptions about the spare, that he wouldn't have ambition, that royals didn't face career anxieties. He explicitly pushes back against this, describing his own deep-seated worry about finding purpose, his desire not to be a cocktail-slurping, eye-roll-causing sloth. This struggle against a predetermined narrative is a key insight from the book.
That struggle for his own identity within a defined role is palpable in these pages, and the dynamics within his closest relationships are a major focus of the memoir excerpts.
Definitely. The relationship with Willie is described with a mix of affection and deep tension. We see physical descriptions like Willie's familiar scowl, his alarming baldness, and his fading resemblance to Mummy. But more significantly, the text captures the emotional complexity, describing him as both his beloved brother, my arch nemesis. The memoir recounts earlier moments of closeness, like running to Willie after a bad haircut or sharing weed, starkly contrasting with later distance, like Willie pretending not to know me at school.
This evolving dynamic culminates in that detailed account of the physical fight at Nottingham Cottage, right? A relatively small home on Kensington Palace grounds. The text describes Willie's arrival already upset, his criticism of Meghan intensifying, and the physical altercation that followed, resulting in Harry being knocked to the floor, his shirt ripped, and his necklace broken. He recounts calling his therapist immediately after, and her guidance helping the surreal experience feel more like a bad dream.
Yeah, quite a scene described there. The text also provides specific glimpses into the relationship with Pa. There's the poignant plea from Pa, "Don't make my final years a misery," conveying his own weariness. Harry describes Pa's voice sometimes sounding raspy, fragile, old. We read about Pa recalling feeling persecuted at school and giving Harry advice on work ethic. There are anecdotes like Pa laughing at inappropriate times during Harry's theater performance, his increasing sedentary habits, and later, in the narrative, his father reportedly not taking his calls. These specific interactions paint a complex picture of their bond.
And Kate's presence appears in several notable moments as described in the memoir. She was reportedly involved in the discussion leading to the infamous Nazi uniform choice. Nazi uniform, they said. There's also the widely reported bridesmaid dress incident. The text presents this from Harry's perspective, describing Kate having other problems during a stressful period, her telling Meghan, "If the dress doesn't fit, then please take Charlotte to see a J." He found Meghan sobbing afterward, but describes it as a simple misunderstanding, noting Kate brought flowers later as an apology. Her reaction to Meghan's colorful joke at trooping the color is described in the text as prompting a yawning silence. These specific, sometimes tense interactions involving Kate are significant details offered in the memoir.
Mm-hmm. Moving into adulthood, the texts extensively cover his military service, a period that seems to have offered both purpose and intense contrasts.
Sandhurst, the military academy, is described as a place where he felt unexpectedly lit up, drawing a comparison to people entering monastic orders, finding a sense of belonging or clarity. He even found a strange humor in the lack of privacy, where doors had to be propped open because he felt he was already so used to a lack of privacy in his royal life anyway. It's an ironic observation from the text.
It really is. And the description of survival training is particularly stark and confronting. He recounts being moved from one stress position to another and doing things he notes were illegal under the rules of the Geneva Conventions, including being blindfolded, pushed against a wall, and spat at. He details the instructor's explanation that they felt you needed to be tested and their half-arsed apology, specifically regarding comments made about his mother during the training.
Wow. His experiences in Afghanistan are a significant focus in these excerpts, too. He describes the challenging conditions of life at Dwyer Base with sand everywhere, even waking up with a spoonful of it in my mouth. His role as a forward air controller, FAC, calling in airstrikes, is detailed. He talks about using a hierarchy of landmarks to guide pilots and the paradoxical feeling of feeling normal, talking to a pilot 15,000 feet up. The text presents this as an insight into just how abnormal his everyday life must have been if that distant connection felt like the first place he could simply be.
That's a really interesting point. Specific incidents from his tours are recounted, like a Taliban attack occurring on his birthday. And the controversial detail of his Apache kills is mentioned, describing the text as treating them like chess pieces, and noting the number 25. His motivation for being there is explicitly drawn from 9/11 in these pages, viewing fighting the Taliban as avenging one of the most heinous crimes. He also describes suffering trench foot and having to leave his tour early because of the medical issue.
Right. And the return to Britain after these tours is presented as a jarring contrast to the intensity of Afghanistan. He describes feeling out of place, a bit distant, sometimes panicky, sometimes angry. He wondered if people back home truly grasped what was happening across the world. He mentions the decompression period in Cyprus as a necessary bridge back to civilian life, though the transition was clearly difficult, as described.
And the memoir notes the public reaction to his service and his return, particularly the intense scrutiny he faced after admitting his kills in an interview, and the criticism for comparing Apache controls to video games. These reactions, as presented in the text, underscore the challenge of translating military experience back into the glare of public life.
Yeah, definitely. Following his military service and the period around the Invictus Games, the text describes a period of significant internal struggle. He felt sluggish, hopeless, and lost, describing himself as toggling between debilitating lethargy and terrifying panic. This paints a clear picture, based on the memoir's account, of the mental health challenges he faced after leaving active duty.
And this period of internal difficulty leads into the narrative of his search for love, and ultimately, a different kind of peace. This becomes deeply intertwined, according to the excerpts, with meeting Meghan and the subsequent rapidly intensifying external pressure.
The constant, unrelenting battle with the press is a pervasive theme described throughout these pages being followed. The omnipresent cameras, the tabloid headlines, paparazzi tactics, and that ongoing feeling of being caught in the rolling royal melodrama. It's just always there.
Always there. He describes meeting Meghan, first seeing her on Instagram and feeling like he saw one face for me among countless others. The early dates are recounted with a sense of nervous excitement, the short first date, the long hug on the second, and staying over on the third, eating pizza and watching Friends. This led to what he calls texting and FaceTiming marathons, suggesting a rapid and deep connection forming across distances.
The trip to Botswana is highlighted as a pivotal moment. He describes Tej, a mutual friend, meeting her there, noting her appearance, their time driving in the bush, holding hands, kissing with bodyguards discreetly, pretending not to see. The text details wildlife sightings like giraffes, elephants, and lions, and his impulsive act of running into the bush to find flowers for her, recalling earlier advice from someone named Agi about finding strength or beauty even in thorn bushes. It blends the romance with these symbolic details from his past.
Yeah, it's quite evocative. Introducing Meghan to the family is recounted with specific details about various meetings. He describes her meeting Granny first, then Willie, Pa, and Kate, and later mentions Eugene's Charlie and Andrew. The text notes Willie's initial reaction, suggesting the pretending not to know me dynamic continued somewhat even after meeting her properly, and Pa seeming impressed by her confidence. These specific interactions, as presented in the memoir, offer insights into those initial family dynamics.
But then the severity of the press scrutiny directed at Meghan becomes a central and really urgent theme in the narrative, doesn't it? Tabloid headlines are explicitly quoted in the text, including phrases like almost straight out of Compton, gangster royalty, and the deeply invasive Pornhub story. He describes the treatment as dehumanizing, sheer vitriol, and explicitly identifies racism as a significant factor in the press coverage. The text also recounts the distressing incident of Meghan's mother being followed by paparazzi. It sounds just relentless.
Relentless is the word. The memoir details Meghan's mounting struggles under this pressure. She felt surrounded by paps, unable to go anywhere without being pursued. The text includes a deeply troubling account of her suicidal thoughts, telling Harry, "I don't want to be alive anymore." He describes his reaction to this and the immense conflict it created with a pre-scheduled Senabel event. Referring to the charity he founded, he was required to attend that night, highlighting the impossible tension between his personal crisis and public duty.
That's just unimaginable pressure. This period also brings up the discussion of therapy, both his own and reflecting on his mother's experience. He mentions feeling guilt related to earlier surrogate mums who cared for him. The text describes him asking his therapist, Dr. Segal, a fundamental question. Is what I'm feeling normal? This detail from the memoir shows his process of trying to understand his own reactions and the cumulative impact of his experiences.
Mm-hmm. And this intensifying pressure, particularly as described in relation to Meghan's well-being, ultimately sets the stage for the decision to step back from royal duties, what the texts characterize as a break and a search for sanctuary.
The fight with Willie and Notcott, mentioned earlier in the relationship dynamics, is recounted in detail again here as a pivotal moment leading to the decision. Willie's criticism of Meghan, the physical escalation, Harry's reaction to it, and the subsequent call to his therapist are all presented as key events in the lead-up to their choice.
Right. The text explains the events leading to the decision to step back, focusing on the feeling that Meghan was defenseless against the press and that the family was not providing staunch support. The leaking of a letter Meghan wrote to her father is explicitly detailed as a turning point. The memoir states the paper knew it was illegal to publish, but did so anyway, reinforcing Harry's belief that information was being leaked from within or close to the family circle.
That must have been incredibly difficult. This tension culminates in the family meeting at Sandringham, widely referred to as the Sandringham Summit. The text notes the irony of Willie's separate entities story breaking in the press just before the meeting began, setting a tense tone. The memoir describes reviewing the 5 options presented, ranging from maintaining the status quo to full severance from royal duties.
And Harry's argument at the meeting, as presented in the text, was centered on the necessity of protection for his family and the belief that the family and the monarchy were actually being done a disservice by not protecting Meghan more robustly from the press. He describes looking at the stony faces around the table as he made his case. The exchange with Willie during this meeting is quoted directly in the memoir, Willie stating, I swear to you now on Mummy's life that I just want you to be happy. Harry's reply, as recorded in the text, was, I really don't think you do. It captures the depth of the stated fracture right there on the page.
Yeah, that's stark. The consequences described after this Sandringham meeting are significant. The loss of security is detailed, which he notes was presented as a government decision.
Wow.
He mentions his father reportedly no longer taking his calls and receiving a text from Willie afterward asking if they could speak, presumably reflecting on the meeting's outcome.
The text then recounts the generous offer from Tyler Perry, who provided his house in Los Angeles. Perry reportedly told them to take my house, assuring them, you'll be safe there, and I'll keep you safe, because, as the memoir puts it, they felt they couldn't breathe under the relentless pressure.
Finally, the excerpts briefly touch upon the financial considerations involved in this transition, mentioning the possibility of using Mummy's inheritance for Archie as a potential last resort for security and housing costs. The memoir notes finding their eventual home in Santa Barbara described as being at a steep discount and located near the sea, offering them the space and peace they were seeking.
So these excerpts from Spare really take us through a powerful emotional and physical journey, from the early shadows of loss and the struggle for identity within a unique system, through demanding military service, the relentless and often brutal pressure from the press, and ultimately a stated search for safety, love, and belonging outside the confines of that system.
Yeah, they provide a very specific, deeply personal account of navigating a life lived so intensely in the public eye and the documented impact that had on his relationships, his mental well-being, and his choices. It's a narrative based on these pages, of trying to reconcile immense public duty and expectation with profound personal need and the desire to create a different life.
Absolutely. What these texts reveal, when you look at them closely, is this constant push and pull between external expectation and internal personal need. If, as the memoir suggests through its reflections on military targeting and the feeling of being treated as objects for consumption, identity can sometimes feel like a hierarchy, and public life involves treating people as chess pieces or objects, whether by the press or perhaps even aspects of the system itself.
Yeah.
What does this narrative ultimately tell us, based on this account, about the human cost of living within or attempting to escape such structures?
And what does that struggle for something approaching normalcy and peace truly look like when your life is, by its very nature as described here, anything but? It's a question these specific texts compel us to consider, isn't it?
A lot to reflect on, drawn directly from these pages, definitely.